The summons arrived without ceremony. An unmarked envelope slipped beneath the hotel door while Marcus Hale nursed another sleepless night. He turned it over, studied the wax seal pressed into its flap, and felt the familiar weight of inevitability settle into his chest. Men like him, astrophysicists who had stared too long into the abyss, were never called without reason. He broke the seal, read the coordinates, and knew his life was about to take a turn that would strip away the fragile insulation of academic theory and replace it with something raw and perilous. The air over Geneva was brittle with winter when he arrived at the compound. The building rose from the earth like a slab of pale stone, deliberately featureless, its windows darkened as though shielding its occupants from the world outside. Inside, the halls smelled faintly of ozone and old paper, a contradiction that seemed to mirror the world of secrecy and science colliding behind its walls. At the end of a corridor, a steel door hissed open, and Marcus stepped into the room where the others waited. 5 men, strangers for the moment, but bound already by something larger than themselves. Captain Elias Ward sat nearest the head of the table, his broad shoulders drawn back with military precision, eyes sharp as if even still scanning a battlefield. Next to him lounged Lieutenant Jonah Cross, young enough that his restlessness showed in every tap of his boot against the floor. Across the table, Dr. Adrian Voss leaned into the glow of a tablet, his pale features impassive, the kind of man who spoke in data rather than words. And standing by the shelves of leather-bound tomes was Samuel Kerr, archivist and historian, who held a quiet dignity that contrasted with the tension humming through the others. Marcus took his seat, feeling the weight of their eyes. He was not the youngest nor the oldest, but the one chosen to bridge science with reason, theory with proof. A moment later, the door opened once more, and a man in a black suit entered, his presence commanding silence before a single word was spoken. He laid a thin folder upon the table, its cover stamped with nothing more than 5 numerals, 2022. "You've been brought here," the man began, his voice level, "because the events of that year remain unresolved. Events which, until recently, we believed to be disconnected. But intelligence now confirms that each was observed by forces beyond this planet." He opened the folder, spreading photographs across the table. "Your task is not merely to understand these mysteries. It is to determine why they matter to them." The photographs slid across to Marcus. The first showed wreckage on a desolate shore, a fragment of metal bearing the faded insignia of an airline lost to the sea years before. MH370, returned in pieces long after hope had decayed. The second was a medical scan, brain tissue marred by lesions, the victims of Havana syndrome whose suffering had never been explained. The third, a blurred image of the interstellar object Oumuamua, its trajectory altered in ways no celestial rock should have managed. The fourth, a grainy military feed of unmanned drones vanishing over the Bermuda Triangle, their signals cut mid-transmission. And the fifth, a satellite shot of observatories across the globe gone dark, their instruments silenced on the same night, without cause. Each man leaned forward, the silence stretching heavy. Marcus studied their faces. Elias had the look of a soldier calculating threats. Jonah's restless energy was stilled for once, his jaw clenched with something like awe. Adrian's gaze flickered, sharp and dispassionate, already parsing probabilities. And Kerr, the archivist, touched the corner of a photograph with reverence, as if holding the weight of history itself. "These," the suited man said, "are the top 5 unsolved mysteries of 2022. They were never meant to be mysteries. They were warnings. And now, we believe, they were messages meant to test us." Each anomaly was shadowed by signals, faint but undeniable, originating from sources beyond Earth. They were watching. He closed the folder with finality. "You are the team that will uncover why." The air seemed to constrict in Marcus's lungs. For years he had theorized that humanity was not alone, but theorizing was safe, the privilege of academia. Here, the implications were tangible, dangerous. Across the table, Elias broke the silence first, his voice low but steady. "If they've been testing us, then they already know what we're capable of. The question is, are we supposed to pass or fail? Adrian lifted his gaze, his tone clinical. Pass or fail implies we're participants in a game. More likely, we're specimens in an experiment. Jonah snapped his head toward him, bristling. Specimens don't fight back. Maybe that's why they underestimated us. Kerr's voice, calm yet resonant, carried an authority that made the others listen. History is riddled with empires that misjudged the resilience of smaller nations, underestimated the will of men who refused to bend. Perhaps this is the same story told on a greater stage. Marcus listened, weighing each word, but the truth pressed heavily on him. Whatever lay hidden in these 5 events, it had drawn the gaze of an intelligence vast enough to span stars. And yet here they sat, 5 men asked to respond as humanity's answer to the unknown. It was absurd, terrifying, but unmistakably human. The meeting closed with the promise of departure at dawn. They would travel first to the waters of the Indian Ocean, where fragments of the vanished airliner had reappeared in 2022. From there, each mystery would lead them deeper, each thread tightening into a knot only they could attempt to untangle. As Marcus left the room, the folder's images burned into his thoughts, a silent drumbeat of questions without answers. Behind him, the steel door sealed shut, severing him from the world he once knew. Ahead stretched a road that led not merely into forgotten corners of Earth's past, but outward, towards something watching, waiting. And though fear tugged at him, beneath it surged something fiercer, something that would not yield. Humanity had always thrived by confronting the unknowable, and Marcus knew, even in this first step, that surrender was not in their nature. Whatever intelligence had tested them in 2022, whatever message had been written across wreckage, silence, and vanished machines, they would read it. And in doing so, they would answer. The night outside was bitter and still, stars glinting like cold eyes above the compound. Marcus lingered a moment, gaze lifted skyward, before turning away to prepare for what was coming. Somewhere out there, the watchers waited. And somewhere within him, resolve began to eclipse fear. The mysteries were no longer unsolved, they were a summons. And humanity had chosen to reply. You said. Remnants of Flight MH370, fragments that had resurfaced nearly a decade after the aircraft vanished, and then inexplicably disappeared once more. Now the sea yielded them again, but what the salvage crews had retrieved did not belong solely to Earth. Captain Elias Ward moved across the deck with a soldier's steadiness, his voice carrying over the wind. We'll be over the coordinates in 20 minutes. The wreckage is secured in the hold. You'll want to see it for yourself. His words were clipped, efficient, but Marcus caught the undercurrent of unease. Ward was a man who trusted the predictable brutality of combat, not the whispers of the unknown. Below deck, in the harsh light of the storage bay, the wreckage waited. Twisted metal gleamed wetly, still streaked with salt. Marcus knelt, tracing the edge of a wing fragment, his gloved fingers brushing a surface that felt wrong, too smooth, as though it had been stripped and reforged by something not human. Adrian Voss stood nearby with a scanning device, his pale face bathed in green light as the results scrolled across the display. This alloy, Adrian said quietly, is consistent with human manufacturing, but the isotopic balance isn't. It carries markers that shouldn't exist on Earth. Someone tampered with it. His tone was detached, but his hands trembled slightly on the console. Jonah crouched opposite Marcus, his youthful intensity sharpened by the shadows. Are you saying the plane was taken? By them? His voice carried the raw edge of a man too young to be jaded, unwilling to mask his fear with cynicism. Adrian didn't look up. I'm saying this wreckage spent time somewhere it shouldn't. Perhaps in orbit. Perhaps farther. Elias's jaw tightened as he studied the fragments. Planes don't just vanish into the stars. Someone made this happen. The question is whether it was them, or us experimenting in ways we're not admitting. Samuel Kerr stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze heavy with the gravity of history. Centuries ago, entire ships disappeared at sea, only to be found years later in places they shouldn't be. Men called it fate or curses. Perhaps those tales were not so different from this. His voice was calm, but it wrapped around the others like a reminder that humanity had always endured mystery and always sought answers despite fear. The vessel shuddered as a swell rolled beneath, drawing a long creak from the hull. Marcus straightened, his eyes fixed on the wreckage. The evidence was undeniable. The debris had been altered by forces beyond human science. What unsettled him most was the implication that someone had returned it deliberately, as though leaving behind a token or a warning. They carried their questions back to Geneva, only to be dispatched almost immediately to Washington, where the second mystery waited. Havana syndrome, an ailment dismissed by some as mass hysteria, had resurfaced in 2022 with renewed intensity. Victims described piercing sounds, dizziness, and crippling migraines, but the medical scans told a darker truth. Inside a sealed embassy chamber, Adrian set his instruments around the room, calibrating them with clinical precision. Marcus observed as the man's usually steady expression faltered while frequencies, imperceptible to the human ear, whispered through the devices. "This isn't acoustic," Adrian said. "It's resonance, directed energy that manipulates neural tissue at the quantum level. No human government has this technology, but someone used it repeatedly." Jonah shifted uneasily, rubbing the back of his neck as if the very air pressed against him. "So, we're guinea pigs. Test subjects for whatever they're perfecting." His words echoed bitterly in the sterile room. Ward scanned the perimeter with the impatience of a man used to fighting visible enemies. "If this is a weapon, then we find a countermeasure. No technology is invincible." But even as he spoke, Jonah's knees buckled. He caught himself against the wall, gasping as a tremor ran through him. Marcus rushed to steady him, feeling the young man's pulse racing beneath his skin. His eyes were unfocused, his face pale, as though he had been momentarily drawn elsewhere. Adrian swept his scanner over him, voice sharp with restrained urgency. "Exposure. Mild but consistent with the syndrome. This room is not empty. Something left its trace here, and it still lingers." Jonah forced himself upright, wiping sweat from his brow. If this is what they did to dozens of people in 2022, then they weren't attacking embassies. They were practicing, refining, watching how we break. The words hung in the room, chilling in their implication. Kerr spoke softly, yet his voice carried. "Empires rise by testing their enemies' weaknesses, but history shows again and again, resilience lies not in strength, but in adaptation. The ones who endure are those who refuse to submit, no matter the pressure." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Each man weighed the truth in Kerr's words against the evidence in front of them. They were no longer merely researchers parsing anomalies. They were witnesses to interference that stripped away any illusion of distance between Earth and the watchers above. As night fell, they gathered outside the embassy compound, their breath steaming in the cold air. Marcus lifted his gaze toward the stars, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon them. Ward lit a cigarette, the ember flaring briefly, his stance taut with frustration. "They're not just testing systems. They're testing us. Our patience. Our fear." The sound came suddenly, sharp and mechanical, breaking the stillness. A faint shimmer crossed the edge of the compound wall, coalescing into the silhouette of a machine barely visible in the darkness. A drone, sleek and alien, its form shifting like liquid metal in the dim light. Ward reacted first, hand instinctively on the weapon concealed beneath his coat. Jonah drew a sharp breath, half in awe, half in dread. Adrian froze, eyes narrowing as though every calculation of probability had just collapsed. Marcus felt his own chest tighten, not in fear, but in recognition. This was no remnant, no lingering trace of interference. This was observation. The machine hovered silently, its presence both deliberate and dismissive, as though confident that 5 men posed no threat. Then, with a shimmer of distortion, it dissolved into the night, vanishing without a trace. No one spoke at first. The moment stretched, heavy with the realization that the mysteries of 2022 were not fragments of the past. They were the present, unfolding in real time, and the watchers were no longer content with distance. Ward exhaled smoke, his voice low and resolute. We're on their radar now. Whatever game they're playing, we just stepped onto the board. The others exchanged glances, the weight of his words settling over them. Marcus knew then that the path ahead would not merely unravel hidden truths, it would draw them into direct confrontation with an intelligence that measured them not as equals, but as variables in an experiment. And yet beneath the tension, beneath the fear, something fierce began to burn. They had been seen, tested, and marked, but they would not yield. The mysteries were no longer unsolved riddles of a forgotten year. They were a dialogue. And tonight, humanity had finally heard the other side speak. You said. The orbital station hung in the void like a lantern suspended between worlds, its panels catching faint light as Earth rotated in the distance. Marcus floated in the observation bay, watching the stars whirl slowly beyond the glass. Somewhere among them drifted the object that had haunted astronomers for years, Oumuamua, the interstellar visitor whose behavior mocked every natural explanation. In 2022, its course had shifted again, as if nudged by an unseen hand. Now, with sensors trained upon it from the vantage of space, they would finally face what no telescope on Earth could confirm. Adrian worked in silence at the console, his pale features illuminated by streams of data. His fingers moved quickly, almost feverishly, as though chasing thoughts too fast for words. Trajectory confirms controlled adjustment, he murmured. It wasn't radiation pressure, wasn't coincidence. Something inside that body responded, steered it. Jonah pressed closer to the viewport, his expression a mixture of wonder and unease. So it was never just a rock. It's a probe. The word carried weight, reverberating in the narrow chamber. Marcus felt the chill of recognition crawl across his skin. A probe implied intent, and intent implied a watcher. If it was left to drift through our system, it wasn't to observe passively. It was bait, to see if we'd notice. Captain Elias Ward crossed his arms, his body steady even in low gravity. And we noticed. That's the problem. We stared back when we weren't supposed to. The question is, do they see that as curiosity or as defiance? Samuel Kerr, tethered by a strap near the bay's edge, spoke with quiet reflection. When the Vikings placed stones to mark their journeys, they weren't asking for dialogue. They were leaving signs for their own. Perhaps this object serves the same purpose, a message left not for us, but for them. And we've trespassed upon it. Adrian shook his head. No. Every adjustment it made was deliberate. That was not a forgotten relic. It was active. It was waiting. His voice carried a rare tremor, a glimpse beneath the armor of clinical logic. For a long moment they stared into the dark, the silent stars indifferent to the turmoil pressing into the chamber. Then Elias broke the stillness, his voice a sharp command. We've seen enough here. Next target. The triangle. If there's a pattern, we'll find it in their ground installations. Days later, the oppressive heat of the Atlantic pressed down upon them as their aircraft skimmed over the restless waters of the Bermuda Triangle. The sea below was deceptively calm, a mirror broken only by the wake of their support ships. Jonah piloted with steady hands, his earlier awe hardened now into determination. Drone vanishings happened right beneath this stretch, he said. If there's something hidden, we'll flush it out. Marcus scanned the monitors, each sweep of sonar distorted by anomalies. Magnetic interference spiked irregularly, like a heartbeat in the depths. Something's down there, he murmured. Not natural. The confirmation came swiftly. As the submersibles descended, cameras caught the shimmer of geometric structures buried beneath layers of silt. The forms were angular, metallic, glowing faintly with pulses of light that matched no human technology. A network of pylons arced outward like the ribs of a leviathan, radiating energy strong enough to twist compasses and choke transmissions. Elias's jaw hardened. A relay hub. They've been using this place as cover. The storms, the disappearances, they weren't accidents. They were camouflage. Jonah's voice sharpened. If this is theirs, then it's active. Which means we can't leave it standing. Adrian turned swiftly, his tone edged with alarm. Destroying it could expose us. Retaliation is inevitable. You'd be declaring war on a civilization that outpaces us by centuries. Elias met his gaze with the steadiness of a soldier who had stared into hopeless odds before. War isn't declared when an enemy already operates in your territory. It's survival. Marcus felt the gravity of the choice press upon them. He looked at Kerr, who studied the feeds with a historian's composure. Every empire that tolerated an outpost of foreign power within its borders paid the price, Kerr said. But every act of defiance carries consequence. The lesson is balance, when to strike and when to endure. The debate ended not with agreement, but with necessity. Charges were set, the hub mapped with precision, and when the detonations ripped through the deep, the sea convulsed as though in pain. The structures cracked, folded, and collapsed into silence, their faint glow extinguished. For a fleeting moment, triumph surged among the team. Then the retaliation came. Above, satellites blinked out, one after another, as though a hand had swept darkness across the sky. Communications collapsed, global systems faltered, and the fragile web of human connection tore open in an instant. The station back on orbit went dark. Across Earth, for 6 minutes that stretched into eternity, the world fell silent. Jonah gripped the controls, eyes wide as instruments died around him. They're shutting us down. Everywhere. Marcus's heart pounded. The magnitude of their defiance echoed into every city below, every man and woman staring upward at skies that suddenly seemed hostile. He felt the enormity of the decision. They had struck, and now humanity bore the consequences. But then, as abruptly as it had begun, the systems flickered back to life. Lights flared, instruments steadied, satellites returned. The world spun again, but the silence left behind a scar deeper than any explosion. Ward exhaled slowly, his expression grim. That wasn't full force. That was a warning. A taste of what they could do if they chose. Adrian spoke softly, almost to himself. We've announced ourselves. We've proven we won't be passive. And now they're calculating how to respond. Marcus looked at the faces around him, each man carrying the weight of choices that bound not only their lives but their species. Jonah's hands still shook faintly on the controls, though his eyes burned with fire. Kerr's composure held, yet behind it Marcus sensed the heavy acknowledgement of history repeating itself, humanity once again daring giants. And Ward, resolute, stood as if already preparing for the next move in a game that had no rules. The sea below lay quiet again, but Marcus knew tranquility was an illusion. They had torn down a mask, and in doing so revealed themselves fully. The mysteries of 2022 were unraveling not as relics of the past, but as thresholds to a conflict stretching across the stars. As night bled into the horizon, Marcus closed his eyes, hearing again Adrian's earlier words. It was waiting. So were they. And now the Watchers would no longer wait in silence. The next move was theirs. You said. The desert air outside the Chilean observatory was sharp with cold, the night sky unfurling above in endless clarity. Marcus stood among the darkened domes, his breath misting in the thin air, his mind heavy with the knowledge that these instruments, once the keenest eyes of Earth, had been blinded in unison in 2022. No storm, no human interference, only silence. He pressed a gloved hand against the steel of one telescope, as though the metal itself might whisper back the truth it had been forced to forget. Adrian crouched nearby, cables snaking from his portable array into the gutted control panels. His pale face glowed faintly under the screens, his voice flat but edged with unease. It wasn't sabotage. These observatories shut down because their data streams were overwritten. Something was here, in orbit, masking its passage. They didn't want us to see. Elias Ward scanned the ridges with soldier's eyes, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. A fleet, he said simply, moving in the shadows, cutting our vision. They were here, and they erased the evidence. Samuel Kerr, wrapped in a heavy coat, gazed upward at the glittering constellations. Throughout history, when conquerors advanced, they silenced the sentries first. Cut off watchtowers, blind the lookouts, erased the signals of warning. This was no different. We were warned, not spared. Jonah paced, agitation radiating from him, his youth fighting against the enormity pressing in. So it's all connected. The plane, the syndrome, Oumuamua, the triangle. It wasn't random. It was a test, and we just failed the last question. His voice cracked with equal parts fear and defiance. Marcus turned, meeting each of their eyes. Not failed. Faced. Every piece points to the same truth. They're measuring us. How we respond, how we resist, whether we cower or fight. His words felt heavier than the thin air, but the fire behind them grew as he spoke. Adrian shook his head sharply, frustration breaking through his clinical veneer. We cannot win. Look at what they've shown us. They shut down half the planet's satellites with a gesture. Their technology dwarfs ours. We're insects throwing stones at giants. Resistance is suicide. Ward's reply came like the strike of steel on steel. Then better to go down fighting. I've seen men survive hopeless wars because they refuse to lie down. Fear doesn't win battles. Resolve does. Jonah's eyes flashed, his youth giving his words raw power. Maybe they think we're specimens. But specimens don't strike back, and specimens don't adapt. We've already done what they didn't expect. We tore down their relay, we saw through their probe. That means something. Kerr's tone was quieter, but his conviction no less steady. Every civilization writes its destiny not in victories, but in defiance of inevitability. History favors those who refused to accept the role assigned to them. The air vibrated faintly, a tremor that was not of the earth. Instruments on Adrian's console spiked, alarms flaring red. Marcus felt the ground beneath his boots hum with unnatural resonance. Above them, the stars blurred as if something vast and invisible shifted across the sky. Then came the voice. Not spoken, but transmitted, flooding every frequency, every device, resonating in their bones. A single command, in tones alien yet intelligible, stay silent. The men froze, each absorbing the message in their own way. Adrian bowed his head, as though the words confirmed his fears. Elias's hand tightened on his weapon, defiance burning in his gaze. Jonah's breath quickened, his fists clenching, ready to shout back against a sky that demanded submission. Kerr closed his eyes, the weight of centuries pressing down upon him. Marcus stepped forward, heart pounding, the enormity of the moment crystallizing into clarity. He understood then that this was no mystery, no accident of history. It was an ultimatum. Humanity was being told to know its place. But Marcus had lived his life staring at stars, asking questions no silence could satisfy. And now, standing with these men, he knew the answer was not to bow. We don't stay silent, he said, his voice carrying over the hum of alien power. We speak. We shout. We remind them we are not an experiment. We are a people who endure. His words struck the others like flint to tinder, sparking resolve where despair had lingered. Elias drew himself up, his voice steady. Then we broadcast. The truth, the evidence, everything. If they wanted us blind, then we make sure the world sees. Adrian looked at him, torn between reason and the fire igniting around him. You'll provoke them. Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. We already have. The only question is whether we stand as specimens or as men. Jonah slammed a hand onto the console, eyes blazing. Then let's make sure they hear us. Together, they activated the transmitters, linking feeds from every observatory, every satellite still in range. Adrian's hands, though trembling, moved with precision, his brilliance now bent toward defiance rather than caution. Kerr's steady voice narrated, framing the evidence with the weight of human history. Elias stood guard, his eyes never leaving the ridgeline. Jonah adjusted the channels, amplifying the signal. And Marcus, with a final breath, spoke into the void. To those who watch us, to those who test us, you will not silence us. We are humanity. We question, we resist, We endure. You measured us as fragile. You will learn we are unbreakable. The message surged outward, riding waves of light and sound, leaping from Earth to the heavens. The alien resonance pulsed once more, sharper this time, as though in anger, then faded. The night was suddenly too quiet, the stars above glinting coldly, indifferent or perhaps listening. For long moments, none of them spoke. The transmission had gone out. There was no pulling it back. Humanity had been marked not by silence, but by defiance. Elias exhaled, his expression grim but resolute. They'll come now. We've forced their hand. Kerr nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the stars.
So be it.
History never favored those who hid. Adrian sat back, pale but no longer trembling, the decision accepted. Jonah's eyes still burned with youthful fire, his jaw set for the battles to come. And Marcus, staring at the heavens, felt a calm unlike any he had known. The mysteries of 2022 were never riddles to be solved. They were warnings. But warnings could be met with submission, or with the roar of a species unwilling to bow. Somewhere in the vast silence, watchers had taken note. And somewhere in the hearts of 5 men, humanity's answer had already been written. The night wind stirred the desert, carrying their breath into the dark. Above them, the stars did not change, but the meaning of them had. The game was no longer hidden. The board was set. And the next move would shake the world. You said,